Welcome fellow gamers to the big one and fellow watchdoggers. Sorry it's taken a little bit longer to get this video to you than I hoped, but I wanted to go into lots and lots of detail and make sure that you guys enjoyed it. So here we go. First thing is the Xbox 360 is not in this version. I'm doing another video which will be the comparison from the original reveal, and that will contain a section on the last gen version. It's not a big deal. This is just the big three. So here we go. PS4. Well, bottom of the screen you can see the shadows. PS4 and the Xbox One are clearly running high settings. PC version you'll see here is a very stronger, thicker shadow line. Back to the PS4, you can see the difference. Now the lighting bloom is the same on all versions. Shadows on PC are ultra, whereas on the consoles they're just high. Now the big difference that starts to kick in quite early in the game is right here. This is the Xbox One, and you can see that the actual waste bin there has no shadows on the edges. Now if we go to the PS4 version, it's got shadows on the edges with some dithering. The PC version has got exactly the same, dithering going on the edges. The other big change here, and a bit of a revelation, is the PC version on high, there, textures, look at ultra, they're much more detailed. Now these are the same textures as you get on the Xbox One and the PS4. Now this is obviously something that's not surprised me. I expected it because of the unified RAM in the consoles, which is a big difference to the PC. But it is something that stands out at points in the game, and at other points it's not a massive deal. But I'll go into more detail of where these highlighted. Now this scene is basically to show the difference between the ambient occlusion that you get on the console versions. The Xbox One basically has a nearly non-existent version of it. If you look at the towel on the left hand side that I circle here, you can see it kicking in, and then you look at it again here with the PS4, you can just see it's a stronger version, and again on the PC, a more detailed version of what's available on the PS4. Now if you look at the text on the right hand side there, it goes from ultra into high. You can see it loses that bump and detail effect off of the texture. It's the same in all over the game. The cabinet that's next to Aiden and the PS4 and the Xbox One are running ultra settings. You can see in the background the Xbox One, it sometimes takes longer to load the textures in the PS4, but they are definitely running ultra settings across the frame. Now here you can see on the PC version the jacket and Aiden's nose. Watch the shadows. As we go to the PS4 version, you can clearly see his jacket has far more detail and the shadows look softer. Again, the Xbox One version is exactly the same textures with the shadows slightly weaker, and also the darker contrast that you get. Now here, if you look at the shadows on the face of the Xbox One, see how it flickers and dithers around? Look at the PC, it's quite smooth and clean. Look at the PS4, smooth and clean, but a little bit lighter. And that's because in places the Xbox One doesn't run the high shadows, it runs medium shadows. And it does that within cutscenes, and it does it within the game. It doesn't seem to be consistent, it does seem to be something that changes, but I haven't gone into hours and hours of comparison, but there is points where I can see a difference clearly, and there is points where I can see it looking exactly the same. Now generally the comparison of the scene here, you can't really see the difference, and that's one of the biggest problems you've got in this scene. Unless you're playing this game side by side, you're never really going to see a lot of these differences that I'm highlighting just now, and what you'll see a little bit further on in the video. Obviously this scene highlights Geordie's brilliant comical timing in the game, and if anyone's played this game so far, you'll know how much fun Geordie is in the game, and literally he's the best character in it by far.
Okay, we got a bunch of dead bodies, right? We got 40,000
But let's crack on with the comparison. Now, this is the big stuff, the PC version. This is the special PC section that I've put into this video. So let's get on with it. The first thing you can see on the left hand side is the CPU core allocation. This is from my AMD 8-core processor. You can see that it's using 5 cores. It's actually using them quite heavily. It's running around 40% of my CPU usage at this point. So WatchDogs is the meat of the matter at the moment on my PC. Now this is running ultra textures and ultra settings. This highlights one of the first big issues you've got with a PC. You can see the frame rate in the top left, and you can see the jittering that's going on. It's horrendous. You need a 3 gig or larger card to run this game with ultra textures. Now the problem with the game is the frame rate judders around and stutters like Billy-O in the game, and you can see it here again as I spin round. It's because the game is loading from system RAM to VRAM, and the consoles don't have to worry about that. The PS4 and the Xbox One have the unified RAM, and that means that they can easily just dump RAM in and out and use it as they need to in one place. There's no need to waste cycles, copying data, it's all there for them straight away. On PC you have to stick it down a 16 gigabit connection, and that's your problem. Now this is running on high textures with ultra settings. The frame rate's not really that much better. It stops the juddering you're getting when you're trying to load textures, but you're running around 17 frames per second. The other problem you've got is these random lighting issues that crop up, and they only appear on AMD cards. My Radeon's doing this, but my GTX 760 is not doing this. So this appears to be some kind of weird driver issue that crops up from time to time in the game, and it is repeatable. I had it here and it fades away, and then I had it here at another cutscene where it just turns me into some kind of psychedelic trip session. So unfortunately, it's not one that I've bought in the game. It's one that's coming free with AMD cards at this point, but I'm sure AMD will be working on a solution quite quick. And this isn't a massive issue, it very rarely happens, but I thought I'd stick it in just for you PC guys in case you've experienced it. You haven't gone mad, you haven't taken a drug, and your PC's not breaking. Now this is a comparison of all the settings, so everything right now is on ultra settings. So we're going to go through and show you how these look in different isolations. You did notice that I didn't change to HBO Plus there, but it doesn't make much of a difference in scenes where you're in shade. Now, ultra settings here, you can see the frame rate is running around 20-25 frames per second. In a firefight, it can drop down to low teens, even single digits. It's completely unplayable on a 7870 that this is being run on at this point. Now, on the GTX 760, it does run slightly better, but it's still way under 30 frames per second in a firefight, and ultra is still completely unplayable on it. Now, there is news on the internet, people were in 6 gig cards that are still getting stuttering, so there's clearly issues on the game. It's not just related to the graphics card being 2 gig. But that said, it's all about the fact that it's built around these unified consoles, so the memory in those systems is going to have an effect. Now you can see here the background, you can see the difference in the shader and the shadow effects on Aiden. It looks very pixelated and very weak, but all these concessions that they've made in the graphics department from low to high all do nothing to the lighting engine. The minor ambient occlusion aside, the lighting engine is unaffected, and it highlights the fact that, as I've already said, lighting is the biggest part of this generation, and it's going to be a biggest part of gaming going forward for a very long time. Because no matter what you do with the settings, this is completely the lowest settings you've got, and there's points where the frame's going up to 70 frames per second. You can't see it in this YouTube video, but the counter on the top left is showing you the frame rate I'm running. But look at the building in the top right when I turn around. You still get the sun bloom bouncing off the building from the sunlight in the game. You still get the shafts of light, the god rays, all of that is completely unaffected by how this game is setting out on the graphical fidelity, because they do not want to compromise the lighting system in this game. And anyone who's played this game already knows how beautiful this game looks at night, in the rain, with spotlights. All these are highlighted points of the game. The frame rate in low is pretty playable. You jump to ultra textures, you get this consistent stuttering and frame rate drops all the time. It doesn't get any better. Ultra is completely out of the window unless you've got a top end card, and even then it's not a guarantee. You can see here without the frame rate just how much juddering you get when you're riding around in the city. There's points where it loads textures where it drops down to 2 or 3 digits or even single digits and stops, and it's just absolutely unplayable, and it makes the game completely, utterly destroys any enjoyment from the game. This is down to 900p on ultra settings, so this is high textures, but everything else is set on ultra. The frame rate is still running sub 30, and again the points can drop down to low 20s, even 17s. Now if you drop it down to high, it doesn't make any difference. It basically bumps up a few frames per second, but as soon as you get into a situation where there's bright sunlight and the global illumination system's kicking in, you get drops down to, again, 20s, and it makes the whole frame rate really, really inconsistent. By and large, it's a great game to play on the PC. The top tip I can say is if you're going to play it, stick it on borderless session, that way you get a full screen view, but you get free active sync running off your desktop, rather than using the buffer RAM and taking up even more of your valuable GPU RAM, which you don't have. VRAM is of essence in this game. Now, the other thing we're going to compare here is the water. Now, if we look at the water on the side of the edge, you can see that as it stands at the moment, high looks pretty much the same as consoles. And that's because, by and large, it probably is. There's a slight difference. Ultra basically adds slightly more depth of the tessellation of the water. So it basically makes it look a little bit more detailed. But it's a minor change, but side by side you can definitely see it. Now the frame rate, you can see, doesn't really get affected by the water when you're standing on it. If we drop to low, you can see it looks horrible. A couple of years ago you would have loved that water and thought it was great, but there's no screen space reflection, there's hardly any tessellation going on. Medium has slight volumetrics, but no screen space reflection, just a specular map. Then we get high, which basically adds in full screen space reflection around everything. Now the limitation here is obviously you only reflect what you can see. If you move the camera up and down, the screen will fade away and end up with water that looks great but nothing reflected in it because it's not on screen. And again, Ultra just highlights the fact that that little bit extra detail and volumetric movement from the water. Now the Xbox One, it looks pretty much the same. I would say it's a combination of high with a slight alteration to it. It's not Ultra, but it just looks slightly different to high. But the volumetrics in the water, where it's bobbing around, the way it tessellates on the boats when you're driving it, the splash, it looks stupendous. And the PS4 version is exactly the same as that. It's got the same amount of depth, it's got the same amount of movement, and the tessellation system is exactly the same. So it looks beautiful, it looks great at night, the light reflects off it, the cityscape bounces off of it, the boats and everything else reflect off it. You saw the lights on the boat, the green light glinting in the water as it drives by. It's a beautiful looking game, it's got beautiful looking water. Now the draw distance again is something that I need to pull into attention. On the Xbox One it seems to run high, but you can see at the top left there, the sign pops in. There is occasional points where the draw distance seems shorter than the other two versions. Again, if you look at the cars in the background, you see how they draw in, but the density of the traffic seems to make it more obvious than not. Now on the PS4 version, you can't really see any popping. What you can see in a shot in a second is the shadows are drawing in quite late. So you'll see there the shadow just draws in as the car pops up. But there's no real huge amounts of popping. Again, the PC version, this is the 760 GTX running here. The frame rate you can see is just slightly smooth when it's driving. The shadows pop in on the car as you drive up. But everything else seems to have a very good level of loading in as you go through. Again, the frame rate on this game is it's good, but it's inconsistent on PC. You have to drop a lot of things down. Basically run at medium on a lot of settings to get a smooth, consistent 30. Now this is where the screen tearing comes in. The worst offender is by far and away the Xbox One. You can see here when I slow it down the amount of tearing going on the screen. It doesn't need to have that much going on for it to happen. It does happen quite regularly, and it happens when there's lots and lots of light going on. Again, that global illumination doing all of its work and basically eating up bandwidth. It's an SRAM issue if I ever saw one. But it's still a beautiful looking game on the Xbox One, and the lighting system in it is identical to the PC. Now this is the comparison of one of the missions where you've got a like-for-like draw distance and a like-for-like lighting system. This is the Xbox One on the left and the PS4 version on the right. If we jump to the PC version, you can see that horrific stuttering and frame difference between the two, which is quite stark in this comparison. But the depth of the scene does look very nice. You can see that the trees and the foliage look slightly denser on the PC than they do on the PS4 and the Xbox One. But the frame rate is nowhere near it, and everything else is by and large identical, aside obviously the image quality to do with the resolution and the AA solution. The PS4 version, again a lovely smooth silky 30 frames per second, and it never feels juddery or out of place. And unfortunately I can't say the same for the PC version. Now ultra textures on PC are pretty much out of the question, but you don't really notice it much unless it's in a cutscene, some of the buildings, and certainly on the road in the dry. If you look at the ground and the pavement and the tracks, you can see that there's kind of like a bump map POM effect going on the ground. It's not, but it's very deep and textured detail on the ground that makes everything look quite vivid. Now one thing I want to touch on is just the visuals of this game. The bokeh, I just absolutely adore it. The depth of field that kicks in, the volumetric light from the coppers and the helicopters when they're chasing you. You can see it here when it's bouncing around the scene. The volumetric light PS4 shown in February is still present in this game, and it still looks absolutely beautiful. When we get out of the car, we get to admire some of the amazing effects in this game as you're playing it. Look at the way the light shines on Aiden's coat as he's running, or the way the bloom there occludes from behind the tree. Look at the puddles and the screen space reflection and the HDR dynamic lighting coming in when the light kicks you in the face. The car occludes the bounce off of the puddle in the ground from the headlights. You've got puddles at the side of the road, which you saw from the beginning video. They build up and then they evaporate in the sun. When you smash the glass, you just get the particle effects and the volumetric smoke dust coming out. There's just so many little touches in this game, it just blows me away sometimes. You get the light bloom from the headlights, you can jump into a cockpit view of any car and all the cockpits look different and relevant to the car you're in. There is so much detail they've put in this game. When it rains, people react, they put towels over their head, they put magazines, umbrellas. You see the water bouncing off Aiden's shoulders as it pans around. You see his jacket get wetter as it starts to rain. Also, on his phone, when he's running, you see that the light reflects off the back of him, and when he runs into a lighter area, it's faded off. The phone can get rubbed in the rain, and the global illumination light shines up his body as it's going. And again, the highlight for me is when you're in the headlights of a helicopter above. Everything gets cast with light, and this is one of the things, again, they've stressed in their development. They've kept everything at compromise to make sure that the lighting engine is not compromised. And that is a testament to their aim, and it looks stupendous. You can see the shadows moving around there from the helicopter. Everything casts a realistic shadow. It's got dynamic lighting and multiple sources going on. The whole scene just feels so alive and real because of the lighting and the shadows in the game. It really is very, very impressive. Again, the console versions win out just because of the frame rate inconsistencies on PC. You can lock it to 30, you can get a smooth frame rate, but you have to spend a little bit of time, and from my experience so far, and I have used the latest drivers, it just never feels as consistent as the console versions. That said, the Xbox One version and the resolution does jar a little bit when you've come from the PS4 and certainly the PC version when you're running at 1080 with a nice temporal SMA solution. It does look a lot crisper and a lot cleaner, and that does stand out. But it's such a minor thing in the whole overall scheme of the game. When you're running a game that's got choppy frame rates running around, you're still running the same frame rate as the console versions. You're probably running at lower resolution textures or lower level textures, but the resolution difference is probably the only real asset that the PC version's got. The native 1080 would be nice on the consoles. For the Xbox One, it's probably not going to happen, but for the PS4, we can hope that update would come. I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility now looking at the game. There certainly is, as I've said before, reasons why this game was rushed, but this volumetric and global illumination lighting in the game is very, very impressive. And I spend most of my time playing it just astounded by how much light effects are going on in the game and how everything is cast in beautiful dynamic lighting. It really is a very impressive system, a very impressive engine in the game. Whether you're playing this on PS4, Xbox One or PC, it looks stupendous, and they've kept it looking pretty static across all versions. When you do a blackout and the lights kick in, the game just feels so alive and so real. And even in the day, it doesn't look bad. You can see here a classic example of the HDR lighting there. The contrast of the scene just gets dipped when the light's in your face. The light bounces off the pool of the left hand side and again creates that bloom effect. When you're caught in the sun and the sun moves throughout the day, it really does feel like you're standing in a city at the real points in the day. You can see the crazy mixed up AI still running from my previous video in the background, my review. And this is again something that does jar in the game sometimes. Some of the AI does ruin it, but that said, it is still a stupendous, fun and enjoyable game to play. This video is a detailed breakdown, and it is done to highlight the differences no matter where they may be. And as I've said before, this is literally the same game across all platforms until they sort out this jarring issue and the texture streaming issue that's going on PC at the moment, which I'm sure they'll do something to solve and smooth those issues out. And with that said, I'm going to let this video play out now with a highlight of what I think sums this game up perfectly. And that is, no matter what you play it on, it is fun. You can act like a badass, you can use all of your tools and tricks in your environment to your own aims. You don't have to run in and shoot people, you can just choose your own methods. Now, hopefully this video you found it enjoyable. Hopefully it's something that you've wanted to see, and the comparisons have opened your eyes to some of the differences you thought were there or maybe weren't there. If you've got any feedback, please, as always, drop it below. Give me some information. I'd like to hear what you guys think. If you can, subscribe. If you want, like. And as always, I'll see you online, or I'll see you on the next one.
Better. in my head. If you're gonna do it, do it!
All right, Damien. Let's talk.